Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Taking a look at the Wisconsin Badgers as we continue our summer scouting. Luke Fickell era, Phil Longo coming in as the offensive coordinator. I can't wait to watch this team in general, but especially on the offensive side of the ball. And you talk about the Big Ten West. It's kind of been the theme of discussion as we've done these summer scoutings for the Big Ten West. It's up in the air. And the Wisconsin Badgers are certainly a program you could see playing for a Big Ten championship at the end of the season. Now, before we get into it, there is a lot of new faces, a lot of new names, a lot of new schemes to get through. Just want to say thank you to you guys, the Wisconsin fans, during this Luke Fickell era, if you will. Just a ton of engagement, a ton of support from you guys. We've been talking a lot about this program, and we can't thank you guys enough for checking us out. So, again, if you do enjoy the content, want to support the fellas, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate all the support you guys have shown. Dill, I'm going to kick it off to you. Paul Chryst, not here anymore. That's a weird thing to say. Ushering in the Luke Fickell era. How are we feeling about this Badgers program?
Yeah, I mean, again, as much success as Chryst had at Wisconsin, they had to make a change. They were never going to, I think, take that next step with how he was running that program, the way he was recruiting, the way he was running that offense. It just was like very yesterday kind of approach to it. And Luke Fickell's a guy who now he's proved it. At Cincinnati, he built that program up to being one of the better programs in the country in a conference that frankly makes it a little harder to be that type of program. So I think that's the right move. The guy who, again, will, I think, crank their recruiting up, bringing a guy like Phil Longo in to revamp that offense and give it some more new blood. I think they made the right moves. Like, we'll see if it works out, but this is at the end of the day, if they want to start winning Big Ten titles or be more competitive for that race, this was the move ahead.
I wonder if they kind of knew they were going to be able to get a guy like Luke Fickell. Because if you don't, I mean, Paul Chryst, I don't think a lot of Wisconsin Badger fans would say Paul Chryst was a bad coach. I mean, this was a very consistent program that was always competitive in the Big Ten. But you did see them kind of just bump their head on the ceiling and never really could kind of blast through that ceiling, if you will. That's why I think they make the move. You go to a guy in Luke Fickell who's coached in a college football playoff game, and he's brought Cincinnati to kind of that where Wisconsin wants to go. And so I'm extremely excited to see what Luke Fickell can do with this program from a recruiting standpoint and on-field standpoint. But Dill, I want to start on the offense because we talk a lot about the new head coaches and the head coaching carousel. I don't know if there's a more impactful coordinator hire than Phil Longo coming with Luke Fickell and taking over the offense in Madison.
Yeah, and probably the biggest thing is they brought in a quarterback who I think can run that Phil Longo air. Yeah. I don't think it's going to be a pure air raid it shouldn't be, because Wisconsin still should probably be a physical, tough team like they've always been. But a guy who you can trust to put the ball in the air more than Graham Mertz and kind of play that spread style a little more. So I think they're off to the right start. They got the personnel I think they needed. Now it's time for more to kind of go execute and then kind of bring along new quarterbacks and new class of quarterbacks, let's say.
Yeah, and this is, in my opinion, what they did in the transfer portal is perfect. You get a guy in Tanner Mordecai who it's hard to find FBS quarterbacks who've been as prolific and productive as a guy Tanner Mordecai like SMU. And he's also very familiar with kind of that spread you out scheme that Phil Longo is going to want to run. And then you bring in some younger guys who are going to be able to learn from Tanner Mordecai, get coached up by Phil Longo, who I mean, people don't talk enough about how good of a developer he's been at that quarterback position. You look back, Drake May, probably going to be a top 2 pick in the NFL draft. Sam Howell, a guy that was an NFL draft pick at UNC. You have Braden Locke. You have Nick Evers, 2 younger, talented quarterbacks who are going to kind of be able to sit on the bench, learn this scheme. The quarterback room is situated very well for the future. Now, Dill, you noted it best, though. Like, you obviously are going to spread you out a little bit more. What makes me most excited, though, is Braylon Allen's going to be running against lighter boxes because teams are going to have to actually respect this downfield passing game. I think Braylon Allen's going to have a massive season.
And that'll still be the thing. He's still probably the best player on this offense. Like, when he's really going, he is as good as anyone running the football. Last year, again, they just couldn't get – teams were stacking against him. I don't think their offensive line played as good as we're probably used to seeing Wisconsin. But this will be a big breakout year for Braylon Allen. I think just being able to have a passing attack that teams got to be mindful of should open it up for him. And you even saw like in the spring game, they started out throwing it a little bit. And then when they got back to kind of,
Yes.
right, like we do have Braylon Allen on the team. We got to use him. That's like when that's what Wisconsin's offense should look like. It still should, teams should get a heavy dose of him.
Braylon Allen was a guy that still averaged 5.5 yards per carry last year with, consistently 7-8 man boxes on the defense side of the ball. And so you get now defenses that need to respect this downfield passing game. You're going to see maybe some more 6 or 5 man boxes with what I think will be a much improved offensive line. Braylon Allen, I think, is going to be an absolute workhorse. And as much as you want to talk about Phil Longo, the spread you out, sling the ball around the yard, I still think the identity of this team, at least from a personnel standpoint, is still some big nasties on the offensive line and one of the best running backs in the country in Braylon Allen.
Yeah, and that's 100% my opinion. And I get it. You do have some guys on the outside that you want to get the football to for sure. But Braylon Allen still be the guy. And again, I just think if they can mix in a passing game that is confident, can keep you out of the third and long consistently kind of mode that they felt like they were in a lot, that's the recipe for success.
I kind of want to talk about a little bit of this offensive line. I know you put a lot of work into kind of evaluating this offensive line. And are we going to see – it felt like in 2022 this was not as dominant of an offensive line as we're used to seeing in Madison. You bring in 2 guys in the transfer portal, Jake Renfro and Joe Huber, who are coming from Cincinnati. My take is Luke Fickell's not going to take Cincinnati kids that aren't going to be able to be productive at that Big Ten level. Do you think this offensive line takes some steps here? Because I think they do.
And I think they should. It's like, I think you got a guy like Jack Nelson, who I think I'm still waiting on to put together a season that justifies like a first, second round pick. And you see the talents there. I think he's a really good athlete, got a lot of power, got to stay healthy. But I think he can really play. I think Tanner Bortolini's solid. I still think they got to get Nolan Rucci on the field. It's like you got a guy who was one of the best tackles in his recruiting class 3 years ago. In his third year, he should be playing football. It's like, I don't think that the other guys on this offensive line are that good that they should be keeping him off. And I want to see him because he's probably the most talented. And again, it just feels like it's time. He's too good to leave on the bench at this point.
Now, before we head over to the defense side of the ball, this pass catcher group, I think is like before they even went into the transfer portal, I still think it was one of the more impressive, or I shouldn't say impressive, but underrated pass catching groups in the country. Like Tremere DK, Keontae Lewis, Skylar Bell, all very good wide receivers that just didn't really get an opportunity in that old Paul Chryst Wisconsin offense to really show what they're capable of. You add a guy like Bryson Green, who is very productive out of Oklahoma State. You add a guy in CJ Williams, who's one of the most highly recruited wide receivers out of his class out of high school. I think this pass catching group is much more dynamic than kind of the national media will give them credit for.
I think Tremere DK, he's an all big time candidate in my opinion. If they can give him some help at the quarterback spot, to be that big, that physical, makes contested catches. He really does a good job complementing the other guys they have. Keontae Lewis and Bell they're like a little more shifty type players, but again, you got a guy in DK who's that clear number one in my opinion. I think CJ Williams will add some depth. I think Bryson Green will be a productive player. They just need to have a guy at the quarterback spot getting the ball because these are really good players in my opinion. I thought they had good seasons last year, especially the guys who are at Wisconsin. It's just the inconsistency from the quarterback spot killed kind of their momentum. But again, I think it's a really good crop of guys.
Yeah, and heading over to the defense side of the ball, you obviously lose Jim Leonard, who was consistently one of the best defensive coordinators we saw in the country. That being said, some other good defensive-minded guys, Luke Fickell, and then brings over Mike Tressel. From just a pure development standpoint, I don't think there's a more impressive guy than Mike Tressel and what he's done at Cincinnati in terms of developing guys, right? You have guys like Sauce Gardner who come in as 3-star recruits to Cincinnati, top 5 pick, defensive player, rookie of the year at the NFL level. You're going to get the best out of the defense on this side of the ball. You lose some guys that we were big fans of, Nick Herbig, Keanu Benton. I still think this Wisconsin defense is going to be pretty damn good.
Yeah, and I think the only spot maybe you have a little bit of concern in is probably that interior defensive line, just because Keanu Benton was like so far and away the most productive player. I do think guys like James Thompson, Gio Paez, I think those two are really good players. if they can take that jump and in some part replace what Keanu Benton gave them, and they don't need to be as good as Keanu Benton, but you got to be tough in the middle. They're big physical players. I think they got the guys, but that's the one position I think if you're a Wisconsin fan, you've been so solid up there up front. You've been so able to stop the run. To me, I think they got the guys, but it's time for those two to take the next step and kind of fill some pretty big shoes.
Yeah, I would also add Nick Herbig to that list. Like we saw with Michigan, when you lose like your premier edge rusher, a guy in Nick Herbig who, from a pure pass rusher standpoint, and this is away from like how he's going to be an NFL prospect, one of the best first steps that we saw across the country, a guy that consistently wins off the edge in the pass rush. I think the pass rush in general, because Keanu Benton was also giving you a great deal of pass rush from the inside, might be a question. But behind that, like I think it's
the only thing I'd say not Herbig as much is I think Daryl Peterson's really good, and I think Gertz is really good. So I think you actually have guys who I think you saw enough. And Daryl Peterson was a young player last year, obviously, only a redshirt freshman. I think he's primed to take that jump, in my opinion. I think Gertz is a very good player. He's experienced. I think he can rush the passer on the edge. So in my opinion, I think they got the guys on the edge to take care of business. I didn't see as much, I guess, from those defensive tackles aside from Keanu Benton, which is maybe the reason I'd make the claim as like, okay, if I was really concerned about one spot, it might be that D tackle spot. But again, I think they do have the guys on the edge, and I think I know where you're going is these linebackers they're just going to cover up for a lot of players because they can do a lot in terms of rushing the passer, stopping the run. They're just dynamic players.
And we talk about the importance of the linebacker position. It's at the NFL level, maybe a little less so as a position value standpoint. But at the college football level, when you have linebackers that can go sideline to sideline, that can fit in the run game, like you said, it can cover up for a lot of other flaws in this defense. I go back to when Devin Bush was at Michigan. I've talked about him plenty of times on the podcast. Devin Bush covered for a lot of poor play on the defensive side of the ball at Michigan. And when Devin Bush goes to the NFL as a top 10 pick, that Michigan defense struggled in a big way without him. And I think Wisconsin has some very solid linebackers that go all over the field. They know how to find the football. That's going to be something nice for Luke Fickell and Mike Tressel to just be able to rely on two veteran backers who just have a nose for the football.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You got the two who we all know in Mehmet Nurmagomedov and Jordan Turner. Those two are awesome. Like, we all know that they can play. They were super productive. One guy I think we should all kind of watch out for is Jake Chaney. I think Jake Chaney, in terms of being able to kind of be that third guy in the mix, I want to see him on the field more. I liked what he could do in terms of generating some pressure. I think Jake Chaney is going to have a breakout year. Again, another guy who was a young player last year, so only a sophomore. I think he's ready to go. I think that, again, you're going to have those two guys. Those are pros. Those are just stalwarts of the defense. Jake Chaney, I think, is going to have a breakout year.
Hey, add him to the notebook. I'm adding him right now. He was not a guy that was on my radar. Adding him to the notebook. In the secondary, this is kind of where I think. I mean, when you look back at the Cincinnati defenses, this is where they excelled. Sauce Gardner, Kobe Bryant, a couple safeties drafted. You lose some guys, but Dill, you saw in the spring game, this is a group of ball hawks. And I would expect if Wisconsin can generate some pass rush from some of those guys you noted, I think this is a Wisconsin defense that can force a lot of turnovers with some of these guys in the secondary.
Well, that'll be the thing to watch is they always kind of did a good job with that under Jim Leonhard. So it's like you got guys who have been coached to take the football away. So again, you're returning a good amount of guys. I know you're losing a little bit at the safety spot, but I think you got the guys to do it.
Would they have 5 interceptions in the spring game? This secondary, they have a knack for finding the football, and I wouldn't say it's loaded. I like a guy like Ricardo Hallman. I wouldn't say it's loaded with first-round talent in the secondary room. That being said, it's a bunch of very disciplined players that know how to play the football. It's a defense, especially in the secondary room, that I could see getting their hands on a lot of footballs. And when you talk about winning games in the Big Ten West, stealing possessions is an absolute premium deal. I want to take a look at the schedule. This is something we kind of do to wrap up our summer scouting videos in general. We talk about this. When you're trying to tell who is going to emerge out of the Big Ten West, I don't have a great answer. We just did Illinois. We said they certainly could be a team to do so. I think it's foolish to say Wisconsin can't do so either.
No, and of course, I think you put like when you make that type of change and you bring a guy like Luke Fickell in, and with what you can do in the portal and with frankly what they did do in the portal, you can kind of revamp your football team pretty quickly. And I think they did do that a little bit. Wisconsin was also a team that had the bones of a really good team. It's not like they were some of these teams that needed to kind of remake everything. Wisconsin was a good football team. They couldn't really ever bring any dynamicness to the offense. And again, they added some players who I think can be that. If you don't think Wisconsin can win this conference, like your side of the conference at least, I think you're like out of your mind.
Yeah, and you take a look at what they have and taking a look at some of the teams in the Big Ten West that they're going to be competing against. You get Nebraska at Camp Randall. You get Iowa at Camp Randall. This is a team that there's outside of probably Ohio State, there's not really a team that I'm saying Wisconsin can't really beat on this schedule. You have some of those bigger games at home. I don't think it's crazy to see a 9-3, potentially 10-2 record from Wisconsin, and then they're playing for a Big Ten championship come the end of the season.
And that'd be, again, I think this Wisconsin team, I think it's still a really good program. It's like they had a down year last year for sure, but you still got a lot of players who can really play football. I think they're right up there with anyone to win this kind of side.
And avoiding Michigan and Penn State from the East is big. Like you have Ohio State. I think a lot of Wisconsin fans would probably say that's a kind of a tough ask. I believe you're on the road for that game as well. But outside of that game, like there's not a single game on this schedule where it's like, yeah, Wisco doesn't have a chance to win this game. And I think that's part of the appeal of bringing in Luke Fickell. Like this is a team that's going to be competitive. And I think ideally under Luke Fickell in a couple of years, you're even saying going on the road to Ohio State isn't a game that Wisconsin doesn't have a chance in. Very exciting team to monitor. And again, when you talk about teams that we're very excited to kind of track over the next couple of years, Nebraska with Matt Rule, Wisconsin with Luke Fickell, certainly at the top of the list. Again, appreciate you guys for checking us out. You guys have been so supportive of the boys. So if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel, and we'll talk to y'all later.